Hey, Nick Adolphsen here from the Maine Christian Civic League. I have the opportunity to be here today with Alex Titcomb, who is the campaign manager for Yes on Question 1, the voter ID initiative that is going to be on our ballots on Tuesday, November 4th. Actually, on our ballots now, if you typically vote absentee. And so I'm excited just to have a conversation about voter ID in particular, but election security more broadly, and just what a powerful and important thing it is for a free society. So Alex, welcome this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So let's start bottom line up front here. You got a couple of sentences. It's the last couple of things you get to say to voters before they walk into the polls. What do you say to voters about this question, about this initiative?
Sure. Well, question 1, yes on 1, is to strengthen our elections here in Maine by requiring a presentation of a photo ID in order to cast your ballot. Whether that ballot is cast in person on election day or early through absentee program, every voter will be required to show an ID to prove who they are and to protect each and every voice in our democratic process.
All right. So let me play devil's advocate for a minute here. Are you saying that there's massive fraud in our election systems and that you're trying to pass voter ID because, there's just this ridiculous amount of fraud? Like, why does voter ID really matter?
Question 1 isn't really about responding to fraud or any problems. Maine has good elections. Continually, year after year, just about we're at the high, the top 5, top 3 states of voter participation and engagement of citizens, which is a good thing. But the citizens behind the Citizens Initiative to pass voter ID believe, and I believe, that we can make something better, not just to be satisfied with where things are. We can look to the future and pass policy that strengthens and improves our elections so that we can continue to lead. Maine will become the 37th state with voter ID. So in that regard, we're not leading, but with the whole question 1, we can set a new standard, and hopefully other states will look to Maine in the years to come.
So I use this example, and I don't know if it's a good one, but to me it kind of clinches some of it, and it's this idea that if my bank decided that they were going to start online banking in 2005, 2006, and they hadn't updated their security. Mm-hmm. And they weren't on a daily basis, almost an hourly basis, continuing to update their security, I would go find a different bank, mm-hmm. right? Because things that I value, I secure. Mm-hmm. And when in the business world, that's the kind of thing that we do. Of course, something as powerful as the vote, as the security around my vote, makes sense that you continue to improve and you continue to just always make it better to ensure that security. So I love that. Talk to me about some of the myths, because man, if I knew nothing about what was going on here, first of all, driving down the road, I could be confused and think this is just a question about absentee voting, because all the signs on the other side are, quote, save absentee voting. So talk to me about some of the myths that are being put out there as part of this campaign, as part of this conversation.
Yeah, so the myths, good myths start with truth, and then they add a little bit or twist the narrative based on truth. So our proposal does deal with absentee ballot process. It's improving the democratic process of casting ballot, of receiving an absentee ballot. And it started with the Secretary of State, choosing a craftily worded ballot question that then enabled the No on One campaign to launch their whole Save Absentee Voting. Because they can't really compete against voter ID. Voter ID is popular. 80% of Americans support the common sense policy of showing ID so that you can vote. So they turned it into, claiming that absentee ballots are going away, and that's 100% not true. Absentee voting will be made stronger, safer, and more transparent for all voters. So I don't know if you have specific myths, specific questions on that, but
I got a message on social media yesterday from an elderly person who says she's also disabled, And her question was just, she said, I lean towards supporting voter ID, but I keep seeing everywhere that I won't be able to vote absentee anymore because of this question. And she said, I thought I wanted to vote yes on question 1, but I'm not sure, because if I can't vote absentee, I'm going to lose the vote. What do I do? What's the truth? And so, of course, we were able to give her a good answer. But what do you say to somebody like that?
Well, I tell someone like that, or every voter, that they'll be able to vote. If they vote by absentee, they're going to be able to vote by absentee. If they vote early, like go to the town hall and cast their vote in the 30 days of absentee early voting, they'll be able to continue to do that. And then at the same time, if you're an election day voter, you'll be able to vote that way. The same way you vote now, these folks will be able to vote then. The only difference is they'll have to provide a copy of their photo ID or write down their ID number on the absentee ballot form to be able to get their ballot.
Yeah.
And the parties, the main political parties have an interest of every voter of theirs getting out to vote. The individual campaigns have interest of voters casting their vote.
Right.
Nonprofit groups as well. So there's going to be plenty of resources and help for folks that may not currently have an ID to help them obtain one so that they can continue to vote how they choose to.
Okay. Let's talk about the question for a minute. So in a prior life, one of the jobs I had was working with state legislators around the country, and we would give this presentation. I spent some years as a bureaucrat. I like to say I'm a recovering bureaucrat. We'd give this presentation on how to, as a legislator, kind of manage the bureaucracy in a committee room or when you're looking for answers. And one of the examples we'd give, and we'd always get a laugh out of the legislators, is we would create this response that was lots of big words, a couple of run-on sentences, something that at the end of your statement really meant nothing, but you didn't know how to respond, right? And I would always tell legislators, like, hey, if you don't understand an answer, or you don't understand, the question that bureaucrat on the other side of the table is asking you, you're not the idiot. That's their job. They ought to be able to communicate things well, communicate things clearly. And it's always a fun presentation because it's an experience that every legislator has had, where they are being really hoodwinked by a bad question or a bad answer that's lengthy and, quote, sounds smart. So when I first read the question that was written by the Secretary of State's office, question 1, I had flashbacks to all of those presentations and my many hours sitting in windowless conference rooms talking about complicated issues with career state employees. It was a question that I could barely make sense of. So talk to me a little bit about the question. Was that, do you think that was intentional by the Secretary of State? Was that, or were those the absolute words that she had to use in order to ask this question honestly?
Yeah, I absolutely believe she intentionally wrote it in a way to influence voters against the question. She has a long public record. She's been the Secretary of State for a while. She was a legislator before that. So there is a long public record of her being completely against voter ID, completely against making our elections stronger, more secure, more transparent. So with that, it's hard for any individual to think that she could be nonpartisan or non-biased when crafting the language. But our state law requires that the duties, that's her duty as Secretary of State. We weren't pleased with the ballot question. We took it to court. Unfortunately, the court ruled that she was within her bounds in crafting that language. But it's definitely, the other day I saw a post on Facebook that some individual did, and they typed in and asked ChatGPT if the question was worded, in a way that the person was for or against the question. And ChatGPT showed that it was crafted in a way that you could tell that the crafter of that language was against the question and chose words to influence people to be against it.
Yeah, so the court wasn't on our side, but the robots are. So we're in good company. No, that question obviously was a little leading, because I have a pretty strong opinion about how that was written, and I, honestly, as a voter, feel offended by the fact that somebody in a position like hers, as a Secretary of State, would intentionally bias the question in a way that is going to drive voters away. Because if I don't understand that question, every single time I'm in that ballot booth or that voting booth and I'm voting, if I don't fully understand what's going on, I'm not going to support something.
Right.
And I think a responsible voter feels that same way.
Yep.
And so the battle you all have as a campaign is an uphill battle to have to educate voters and just show, like, hey, this is what the question actually should have been based on what the law, based on what the proposed law said. Now, you don't have to go into lots of detail here, but she's been pretty, in addition to her writing of the question, the Secretary of State, who is to oversee free and fair elections, has been pretty openly against this question. Am I right?
Absolutely, yeah. Which I think is unprecedented. When that a sitting Secretary of State, the person, like you said, runs our elections and oversees, is actively campaigning against the question, going to door knocking and rallying troops against, even joining the opposition campaign and telling people this is going to get away, rid of absentee voting, which is 100% lie. She's participating in these activities, and she says she's a defender of democracy, and that's one of her highlights that she wants to advertise about herself. But she's harming democracy by engaging in these campaign activities as a sitting Secretary of State.
So this isn't a direction I intended to go with this conversation, but I think it's worth us talking about just for a minute. So Maine's pretty unique nationally in how we elect our constitutional officers. So our Secretary of State, our Attorney General, our State Treasurer, our Auditor, are all elected by our state legislature. Most states, that's a popular vote across the state, right? Because that position is plays such an important role in the execution of our state laws, in the oversight of something like our elections. I mean, it's similar to an Attorney General, right? There's a representation there that should be bigger than just what maybe our state legislators think. So that's that can be your next ballot question, is the popular vote of Secretary of State and Attorney General. But to me, it's also an illustration of the power of the vote. So we know that, for instance, the House of Representatives here in the state of Maine, it was just over 60 votes in 3 different districts that would have changed who was in charge in the House of Representatives. That potentially changes who our Secretary of State is, who our Attorney General is, who our Auditor is. 60, just over 60 votes. That's a really big deal. And for me, it's this reminder that every single vote counts. And it's a reminder that we have a responsibility to be in that voting booth, or get our absentee ballot in the mail and get it submitted. Because if our voice isn't heard, we're going to end up continuing down this line with Secretaries of State like we have, who clearly does not care about free and fair elections as much as what the outcome of an election is. Sorry, that was more a rant than a question.
Yep.
You have a lot of experience with grassroots groups. You have a lot of experience with faith-based groups, and you are a man of faith yourself. Talk to me a little bit about, well, 2 things. One, why should Christians care about voter ID? But 2, why should Christians care about voting, period? If it, I sometimes hear, like, our job is to preach the gospel, and this world's not our home, and heaven's our home, and we use all these justifications. And George Barna, before the 2024 election, nationally said that it looked like, and I don't know all the details of his analysis, so don't ask me questions about them specifically, but it looked like around 40% of Bible-believing church-going Christians would not show up at the polls in November. That's a big number. It's not as big a number here in a small state like Maine, but it's a big number nationally. So talk to me about why Christians should care about voter ID, but then more broadly, why should they care about voting? Why should they show up at the polls?
Well, I think, that it's important for us to get out to vote and participate in elections, because we should use our, worldview and our personal beliefs in bettering society and bettering mankind and helping other folks by electing leaders that share our values. And folks that have similar worldview as us, where government can be limited so that families can thrive, that church and Christians can exercise their faith freely without infringement of ever so expanding government that wants to do away with that. In past societies, you see that as more and more power consolidates in a government, then they usually turn on God's people, view it as a threat, and I think we've seen that in America somewhat. Thankfully, we're in a democratic system still, and that's a good thing, and that's why we should exercise our rights, like our right to vote, because if we don't, then the danger is that we'll lose it, lose our ability to make an influence by way of voting, and that's a lot easier than picking up rifles and going to war like centuries past, where folks had to reclaim their rights by bloodshed. Here in America, we don't have to do that. We can fight for what we believe by the ballot box, and then that goes right into why we need voter ID. To protect our vote, to secure it, to make sure to increase confidence of every voter that it's them actually getting requesting their ballot and casting their ballot, that there's no one else doing that. That there's greater transparency in our elections, because we just talked about our Secretary of State is biased and in my opinion, abusing her role as Secretary of State. So there's been less transparency, which that's a harm, that's hinders democracy, where it should be out in the open. So question one, yes on one helps breathe new transparency and accountability, things with like bipartisan team of election workers to obtain the absentee ballots. Where things like more in the weeds of the initiative, challenging of ballots, so that if someone doesn't have an ID, they get a challenge ballot, so that they then after election day can provide a mean to show their ID. So that's accountability, and every person, not just Christian, every citizen should support question one and for voter ID and participate in our elections.
I have this, and I'm relatively still new in the role here at the Christian Civic League, and I've grappled a little in this role as, do I stay in this lane that is strictly kind of the quote unquote social issues, right? And just been really convicted that like the social issues, I don't even get to have a voice in those issues if, to your point, our elections are not secure. And I think sometimes we forget the foundational things because we're focused on these other things that do matter, significant importance. But if we forget the foundational things, we're never going to get to work on these other issues that we feel so strongly about, whether it's life or whether it's the gender and sexuality, cultural challenges that we're having right now and legal challenges. We don't get to touch that if we don't have secure elections. So I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing toward this, and really that shining of the light on the fact that we need to be constantly vigilant. Everything that we value, we need to be constantly vigilant around. And
and like you said, that those issues totally matter, but we can't get to those issues and resolving those issues if we don't have a means to, elect leaders and elect representatives that will, follow suit on those issues. And the voting system in America, is how we go about impacting the change on things like social issues, on legislation that matters, on whatever the topic is. And the other part of it is that we know the Holy Spirit is the restrainer against evil, and it's really gotten into a good versus evil thing. And part of that job is to restrain evil. Like, we're not going to perhaps have total victory against that, but part of question one is to restrain the potential for abuse and the growth of things into the future of elections. That's a lot of people think the whole fraud thing, but it's really looking at it into the future and stopping the automatic ballot program, because the left wants to get rid of election day. They want to transfer Maine into just an all-in mail ballot, and they do this slowly. So question one wants to stop that program before it becomes a problem, so that we can restrain and kind of conserve the system that was brilliantly designed in America.
So I am not an expert on elections nationally. I've spent a little time working on them in some different states around the country. I know in Florida, and again, I'm not an expert on Florida's system, but I know in Florida, you request your absentee ballot, and you as a voter can track your ballot all the way through the process. You can get online and find out where your ballot is. Has it shown up at the town office yet? Has it been processed but not counted yet? You can track your ballot with, and they use ID numbers on the envelopes, and they have this system. And I used to laugh when we were talking to other states and say, Florida's got this figured out, because they were the laughing stock of the country in the year 2000, right, with all their hanging chads and all the stuff that happened in that election. And they thought, maybe we ought to figure this out. They're now the third largest state in the country, and they have results probably faster than any place. And I say all that to illustrate the fact that voter integrity there are practical reasons why this stuff makes sense, but also that it's achievable. When you can have a state that large, and you as a election official knows where every ballot is. The fact that a state like Florida can keep track of where each ballot is, it brings us to a story here in Maine that I think has been undertold. And I think it's also a story that has not had the kind of reaction that it should have had by Maine voters. And part of that is because the story's been undertold, right? Steve Robinson, the crew at the Maine Wire, they've told this story over and over. Regular media has kind of touched on it here and there, but 250 ballots in a box. And for me, like I can understand that mistakes can happen. And that's why accountability in systems exist, to ensure that when mistakes happen, there's a reaction. We've gotten very little from the person responsible for those ballots. We still don't understand how it could have happened. We understand it was an accident, based on some stuff that's recently been said, but we don't understand how it could have happened. What the system was that was in place to ensure that, maybe did the Secretary of State know immediately when ballots were off track? But so all kinds of things going on there. Talk to me a little bit about that whole issue, and does that concern you? Does voter ID help us get at some of the accountability around an issue like that?
Yeah, well, it's the happenings of in response to this weird situation where there was a break in chain of custody on the ballots has been a travesty that there has not been more information and speedily available like there should have been. And if you're a defender of democracy and we have safe, secure elections, and then you don't provide explanation of how this happened or who was responsible, we still don't really know from official sources. We have some of the story in the news outlets, but we have the Secretary of State saying it was bad actors. Now, a couple days ago, the news said that it was an accident. And Maine people don't know.
Right.
And if you care about process, if you care about our election system, then your mind wants to know these answers to see what happened and how can we then we can look into how can we prevent this from happening again, because when random ballots show up in someone's Amazon delivery, that decreases faith, that decreases confidence of voters. No matter what party registration you are, like, people should be freaking out. And in my opinion, it's kind of sad that there is no more, there isn't that much backlash from citizens in regards to demanding answers in this critical issue.
Yeah, for me as a voter, if she had come out, if the Secretary of State had come out and said, mistake happened, but we know exactly where each bundle of ballots is at any given time. Here's the process in which we identify where each one is. We know every single ballot that's been printed. We know if a ballot was lost or if it was voided for some reason, or we know which ballot that is, and we can track. Like, if she had come out and made some statements about how competent their team was in tracking ballots more broadly and understanding, which, I would have, even as a conservative, would have said, like, oh, okay, they made a mistake. I can forgive a mistake as long as there's a system in place to mitigate the problems. But to your point, there was none of that. There has been radio silence. And this is a bigger question around, it's not really a question, more a statement around elections. But to go back to the importance of people holding elected officials accountable. And we don't get to vote on a ballot for the Secretary of State, but we do get to vote on a ballot for our state legislator who chooses that. And if there is no accountability at election time for the actions of an official who represents the entire state, we've got a problem. And so again, I really appreciate the work that you're doing to help secure our elections, to help create accountability, to help create transparency inside our elections, because without it, the democratic process we have is at risk. One more question, and this is it's a money question. So conservatives, Republicans, last I saw online, we're the party of the rich. We're all about tax breaks for the rich. Interestingly enough, when you see the map of Maine, the places with the highest percentage of food stamp recipients, it's all Republican counties. Interestingly enough, that doesn't seem to align with spending that happens in campaigns. So talk to me a little about the spending. Are you guys, is the yes on one campaign outspending the other side, or what's the dynamic there? Talk to me about it.
Well, the press likes to paint that picture and say that the Republican Party is the party of the rich, and there's tons of money, and even with question one, they accused us of having tons of money to ram this through, and it was not a citizens initiative, which it is. Hundreds of everyday Maine people collected signatures. We got the historic amount of signatures for less than $25,000 because we didn't pay for any signatures, which is most common in citizens initiatives now. And so then recently they kind of changed their tune, because as more data and as those financial reports become available, you can see that the No on One campaign is outspending us 3.5 times to us. So they've spent over $2 million, and we've spent $560 or so $1,000 on in trying to influence Maine people to vote on question one. So yeah, no, they're the party that has the money that comes in, and it's nothing really new or surprising. We knew we were going to. That was the outlook of the campaign finance was going to be, because year after year the Democrats here in Maine get seems like unlimited money, but millions of dollars poured in from out of state dark money sources to try to influence and try to hold their control. And for whatever reason, they're very worried about Maine citizens passing a common sense policy like voter ID to increase the strength of our elections, that they're spending over $2 million to try to stop it.
Which ought to say everything we need to know, right? Alex, give me just when you're talking to a friend and they say, there's only, 5 days left, or I should know how many days, 4 days left, before 4 business days left, before election day. What can I do today to help affect change, to help positively affect the Yes on One campaign? What can I do?
The biggest thing, the most important thing, is to go out and vote, to cast your Yes on One ballot. And then our ask is to bring 3, 4, 5, 10 friends with you that are yes voters, and make sure that they vote. Whether you take them in person, if it's your family members, or call them, go through your phone, and every person that you have a phone number of a Maine citizen, tell them to go out and vote. Texting, however you can, influence other folks in your sphere and influence to vote yes. Off-year elections, there's only 2 ballot questions on this ballot. It's going to be very small turnout, so in our case, your vote is actually even more impactful, especially in a tight race or a close election. Every single vote, this could be decided by 100 votes. So your vote and your friend's vote is critical.
Okay, very good. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me today, and optimistic and looking forward to seeing what Tuesday next week brings.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.